And we're live. Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Masson, and I am the president of the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. We're a club that focuses on the human rights for people with disabilities on a global level. And we have a very interesting subject that we're going to talk about today. We have Amy and Bodkin. Is that how you say last name? Okay.
Yes.
Amy and I ran into each other last October.
Yes.
And we were when the club was sponsoring a inclusive education summit, which we had about 500 people register for that, and I think we had 35 speakers, and Amy was one of them.
Yes.
So the subject, what I am going to find, and I'm sure a lot of people will find fascinating, and this has got to do with homeschooling. And Amy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Okay. So I am autistic as well as ADHD. I've got a whole bunch of alphabet soup after my name that describes all the different things that I have and degrees that I've earned. But I used to be a school psychologist. I've worked in public schools, private schools, and I homeschool my own children now. And I ended up kind of switching to where I worked with a lot of homeschoolers. I still work with public and private school students, but I do a lot of work with homeschoolers these days. Working with their families, doing assessments, figuring out, okay, where are we? What's your body asking us for? Because if we can give a child what their body's asking for, then they grow and learn on their own without as much effort. When we don't have what we need to grow and learn, it's harder. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. Important things is that I come at this from a three-prong approach. I have disabilities myself. I'm trained to work with people as a school psychologist, and I'm also a parent of autistic children, homeschooling them. So I get to watch super up close and see what all's happening and how development and learning happens as a parent. So
can you explain to us then what is homeschooling and really how does it work?
Yeah, so homeschooling, it's not very common. It's more common in the United States than anywhere else in the world, and it's definitely growing. Um, when you think about feeding your children, nobody goes to school to become a chef so that they can feed their children well, or a nutritionist. You read, you learn, you find other people who know about how to feed children and what kinds of recipes work and what kind of nutrition you need, and then you facilitate that. You go out and you find and procure what foods would be good for them or what their bodies need to grow well. And we do the same thing with education, whether you're public school, private school, or homeschooling. But with homeschooling, you're doing a bit more specific facilitating, because you are going, okay, we need to learn about reading, writing, math, science, history. How do we want to make that happen? What's the best way for that to happen for this child? Where do they need to focus on? Do I need to get an outside teacher for this subject? Do I want to outsource all of my subjects to an online school or a micro school? Do I want to teach some of them myself? Does this child need a specific curriculum that teaches in a way that they learn best? Those are the kinds of questions that parents are often asking themselves when they homeschool. And so it's kind of creating a custom tailored curriculum for your child. And there's nobody more motivated than a parent, because parents are usually thinking, I got to do a good job because this kid has got to leave my house eventually. Yeah, they want their kids to be successful, because otherwise they're the ones who are responsible for their child.
Right.
So,
right.
Very motivating.
So how do you do? Do you do it virtually? Are you going to people's houses or what? How are you doing?
It can happen any of those ways. In our house, we do a lot of our subjects at home together. We read a lot of books. That is one of our favorite ways to learn. We will get a snack, some lunch, sit on the couch, read books together, discuss them. It's the same way that we learn as adults. It's just, usually we're in more of a structured setting, but being in a home setting, you can be more relaxed. which can reduce the anxiety. It can also allow kids to have more time to sleep or do self-care if they have medical conditions that require extra support. And then if there's something special that we want to learn, then I find a teacher. I outsourced music. I am not a highly skilled musician. I love music, I play, but I am not skilled enough to continue my children's music education. So I search them out a music teacher. One comes to our home, and the others we go to. My daughter wanted to learn sewing because she's interested in going into art therapy. So she needs to take art classes in a variety of modalities and materials. And so a sewing class is a great option for her. So I found a sewing class that she can go to physically. But we also do online classes. I'm teaching an online class right now called Building a Life You Love for Career Planning. And so there's all kinds of different ways that you can choose to get that education, and each family is different. That's what's really special about it, because a lot of times in a school setting, we have a specific structure we have to work within. And so you aren't able to completely customize an education to fit the needs of a specific student. And this is a big deal when it comes to disabilities, because we often have very big differences in our development.
And so are you covering any subject, all subjects that also would be covered in a school setting?
Oh, yeah.
Are you covering?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And when my kids are actually in high school right now. And so I have the list of credits that are required by our state, and we are going through and taking care of each one of those credits. Mm-hmm. I outsourced foreign language. I've outsourced music, physical education. I like to do history and literature myself. Sometimes I outsource science. Sometimes I teach it. It depends. And it depends on the child and what they need at that point, because different kids connect with different things. Like, kids learn in different ways better. And so if we can pay attention to that, then they can sometimes get a lot more out of a subject than if it's taught in a way that isn't the way their brain thinks.
So can a student actually go through all 12 grades with you?
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, my children are going through all 12 grades with me. I have told them many times, would you like to go to school? And they say, absolutely not. You have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. Going to the bathroom is a human right. I don't want to go to school.
Right.
Which I think is funny. It's an interesting perspective for a child who has never been to school, because they have definitely learned a lot of self-advocacy skills. They have very specific ideas about what people can tell them to do and what people can't tell them to do. And I really love the self-advocacy skills that have developed. That's actually one of the things that we see among homeschoolers. We see higher rates of positive mental health. And I think, and we also see a lot more variety. A lot of colleges in the United States actually seek out homeschoolers because they have so many diverse interests. Because you can choose to do things very differently because you don't have to work within the school. So the school only offers French and Spanish, so you have to take French and Spanish maybe. But if you have other, like, the sky's the limit. You can take sign language, you can take Hebrew. You just got to find a teacher who teaches it.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we understand when we talk about this that we're talking globally, but I mean your experiences are more in the United States.
Well, I do work with families in other countries, and each country has their own laws. So in some countries, it's illegal to homeschool.
Right. And I guess that question comes down now. So the education that you're providing for a student, and in this case, we're talking United States, is recognized by the government. Yes. And I would assume you or the student needs to report to the government that and certify that they've taken these courses. And I mean, once again, I guess I'm trying to figure out how that all works. So you're registered with the government somewhere, your education department or something somewhere. Correct.
So in the United States, it's done by the states because the education system is primarily run by the states. There is a federal arm, but most of it is designated by the states. So each family who homeschools has to see what the laws are for each state. And then that determines how they register. So in where I live in Florida, this is just one of the 50 states, each one's different. So you really have to kind of figure out what's required in your state. But in my state, we have two options. You can sign up under an umbrella school, which is kind of like a private school option, except you don't ever go to the school. So you turn into the school how many days that you attended school or were learning. And that's mostly what's required because private schools don't have to turn in as much to the state. With the public school option, which is what we use, you sign up through the county as a homeschooler, and then you either test or you do an evaluation, which could also include testing each year to show that your child is continuing to make progress. If they don't make progress for 2 years in a row, then you can no longer homeschool. So there are some guidelines. However, one of the things that's coming up in the research is that it is very rare for children to not continue to progress as homeschoolers. They tend to actually perform better on standardized testing than most public and private school students in the research.
Oh, excellent. So, but
Yeah.
but I would imagine one of the comments that people have, whether it be criticism or what, of homeschooling, there's no social interaction with other students.
That is the question that we get the most, and I find it to be kind of entertaining because most homeschoolers know that that's the least of your concerns. Especially where I live, we have an extremely large homeschool community because we live in a military area. So we have families who are moving every 3 years. And one of the ways to maintain stability in a learning environment and to allow them to have time off when their parent is home from deployment is to homeschool. So we have a lot of homeschoolers in our area, and there's growing homeschool groups all over the country. So the biggest problem is not finding people to socialize with. The biggest problem is finding time to school because
Really?
there's so many fun things you can do
Yeah.
that and it's great. We've done field trips. We've been to historic places. We went to a music store where we got to try out all these different instruments. We went to some animal encounters. We've done park days, which usually happen weekly where we are at. There are just so many things that you can do. There's classes during the day for homeschoolers, for gymnastics, martial arts. And then, of course, there's the events that homeschool parents create. One of the things that homeschool parents are aware of is the fact that making sure your child gets social interaction is on you. And it's the same way with education. You know it's on you. And because of that, parents are very intentional because they want their children to succeed. They want them to be well socialized. But another thing I tell parents all the time about socialization: when was the last time you were in a building or a room with all people your exact same age?
Right.
Probably not since high school. So that's
Right.
not a generalizable skill.
Right.
But when was the last time you went to the post office, the grocery store, talked to a person older than you, played with a
Right.
child younger than you? We do those kinds of things all the time. And that's what homeschoolers do all the time. So in a way, the social setting is more generalizable to later in life.
You make a lot of sense. So, okay, let's take it another step further then. Uh, so I would imagine too the other problem with going to back to my child, they say I have ADHD, so my focus is not very good, and still at this
Mhm.
point in my life, it's not very good. Um, so, and I take Spanish lessons online, and
Yeah.
anything that happens around me distracts me. And so I would imagine, particularly in a virtual situation,
Mhm.
that you have a student who is easily distracted anyway.
Yeah.
And how do you keep that focus for what do you do it for an hour? Is an hour session?
Well, when I teach it, it varies, and it also depends on what we're teaching. Depending on the family, it really depends. We did not do virtual options for my youngest until he was older because he did not have the focus, and virtual was very frustrating to him. So all of his education was done in person, either with me or somebody else local, until he was older. As he got older, we've used more virtual options. When I teach, though, and I don't teach many classes, in a year, because I do a lot more support services with assessment and helping parents know what tools they can use. But when I do teach, I usually teach to a broad range of developmental abilities, and I take all of those things into account when I'm teaching. So, for instance, I taught Hebrew a couple of years ago. And when I taught Hebrew, my class was anywhere from 3 years old to 50 years old. And what I did was I structured the class so it would work for everybody. So we started out with some fun songs, like the ABC song, especially. Well, it's not ABC in Hebrew, but all of that song, so that they could start to learn the letter names. We'd also do some fun things like, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, which I realize may not be as fun for someone who's 50, but at the same time, I think we're all kids somewhere deep down in there. And if we will let
Mhm.
ourselves be kids, then there's a lot of ways that we can all learn together in a way that supports learning, especially for our kids that have shorter attention spans. And so shifting gears, like every 5 to 15 minutes to something different, really helped. So, and I also would release the younger kids, the ones that have more trouble focusing, early. That we'd do
Okay.
their part first, and then we'd let the older ones go on. So, but never more than an hour, and it was always very short increments. So there's lots of different ways that we can do that if we want to do a virtual instructional setting. Um, a lot of homeschoolers, they do their work very quickly. Most elementary school students only spend an hour and a half a day doing school,
Mm.
unless, of course, they're in a specific classroom setting. But at home, it can be done in an hour and a half because you only have one student, or maybe two or three.
Okay. Well, that makes sense because that was my question. I mean, normally a student would go to school for what,
Mhm.
6 to 8 hours a day,
Right,
but you're not
right.
giving them 6 or 8 hours a day.
Mhm.
You're giving, as you just said, an hour and a half maybe a
But
day.
it's focused, and it's time that they're actually paying attention. And the other thing is that if you've got a child who's autistic and maybe like they've spent a lot of their early child years going to speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, we're giving them the opportunity to get to hang on to their childhood for a little bit longer, because play is so important for development. And when we try to skip that has long repercussions, on children. And so having that extra playtime is just so critical for kids with developmental differences. Um, it also allows kids who have physiological health problems to be able to access medical care that they need without having to have as many absences, missed time in lessons, because they're not having to spend as long. So I think that's really important. One thing we did when we had a lot of appointments when my kids were small, we would use a lot of audiobooks, and we would do most of our school in the car or waiting in waiting rooms at doctors' offices so that when we got home, they could play.
Okay. And one more question, and then we're gonna
Yeah,
let's get in, and then we'll get into the inclusive education part of this whole thing.
yeah.
And that is, you. So a student could actually do a mix.
Oh, yeah.
Go sometime to a public or private school, and then
Yeah,
sometimes dealing with a homeschooler. Is that correct?
absolutely. And we actually have some students in Florida, I know, where they go to school for like 2 classes and then they do the others at home. So we can do that in the current year. You could spend 1 year, we're going to do public school this year, we're going to homeschool the next year, we're going to do private school the next year. You can combine these, you can facilitate their education in any way that you want. You have, as the parent, the only thing limiting you really is your own creativity.
Okay.
So.
So, and you focus, do you focus on basically student, and when we get in now into a disability part of this whole thing, this inclusive education part,
Right.
are we focusing on neurodiverse students as opposed to students that maybe have physical disabilities?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where our focus is. You're not necessarily
Right.
working with the blind or deaf or something like
No,
that.
I can get a little bit of anybody. Like as a school psychologist, I had training in a lot of different areas. I do definitely have several clients who have had cancer, who have chronic health conditions, who have genetic mutations. There's a wide range of families I work with. The majority of the students I work with, though, are neurodiverse. And I also would argue that kids who go through trauma and also kids with physiological health problems often end up being neurodiverse. I just don't know that they're always ready to come to that immediately, like, especially if you get cancer. You're coping with how you're not the same as you used to be, how this disease has impacted you. And so labeling yourself as neurodiverse at that point, that might be very uncomfortable because of what all you've lost. But we definitely see a lot of that neurodiversity happening in kids who experience trauma and physical health problems at an early age.
Okay. So now, in your opinion, did you think that homeschooling is more inclusive for students with neurodiverse disabilities than regular school?
I do, with a caveat. I would never tell a parent that their choice of how to educate their child is wrong because there's many different ways to do things. And there's pluses and minuses no matter what way you go. However, with a homeschool setting, we can adjust that setting in so many different ways that you can't adjust a private or public school setting. And so it is much easier to adapt for differences in development and different needs that a child might have. So it gives us more flexibility to meet those needs.
Okay. So I
I also see
I
great gains in kids when they homeschool too, if we find the right thing they need.
I know. I mean, when I went to school, it was such a long time ago. But and back then they didn't even know what ADHD was. I mean, they had no concept of it. So and neither did I.
Sure.
I
I
didn't
know.
realize I had ADHD, but I know I struggled. I know I struggled.
Yes.
So I'm thinking if we had something available like when I was a kid,
Yeah.
um, that yeah, it would have helped me out, particularly with homework with
Oh,
ADHD.
yeah.
For me to go home, I'm not in the school setting anymore. I
Mhm.
would imagine you could help a lot of students with homework.
Yes. And also, though, I grew up going to a private school myself, and that was one of the challenges. Homework was one of the challenges for me because I would spend all day trying to hold it together, getting the social and behavioral expectations right, trying to learn in a way that was being taught that was not how I learned best. And then I'd have to come home and do homework and try to reteach myself all the things I didn't catch that day that had been taught. And it was absolutely exhausting. Um, and so when I realized that my kids were very similar to me, that's when I decided to homeschool because I remembered how exhausting it was. One of the things that I think that schools could do is quit giving homework. The research is showing that giving homework is not beneficial. And I think that would really help a lot of kids that are neurodiverse because it is exhausting to go to school and to be constantly inundated with all the sensory overload and to be trying to socialize correctly without getting made fun of and bullied and to be trying to follow the school's behavioral expectations when maybe you understood the rules differently and somehow you ended up in big trouble or trying to learn in the way that the teacher is teaching with all the distractions in a way you don't learn well. I don't learn well auditorily.
Yeah.
You know, it's too distracting. There's all the sounds, and I often don't hear things correctly. I'm constantly asking my family because I have an auditory processing disorder. I'm like, I thought you said this, and
Yeah.
it's not even close.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I'm all for that.
yeah,
I hated homework. I mean,
yeah,
it was a struggle for me.
yeah,
And I would probably
mhm,
spend 15 minutes on, it, then I get distracted.
yeah. And I mean,
So
truth be told, like teachers and schools have a hard way to go because, they've got a lot of students with a lot of different needs, and not every student is coming to school with all of their basic needs met. A lot of kids come to school hungry. They come to school without having had a good night's sleep, without having all of their basic needs met. They also come to school sometimes with a lot of emotional needs, and we can't fix all of those.
yeah,
And that's one of the advantages of homeschooling is that you don't have to contend with everybody else's needs and problems.
yeah,
Because sometimes, you go to school and you're in class with this kid who's like got a lot of emotional turmoil. And sometimes that can end up impacting your own child. And so
yeah,
we can kind of create this environment for them to grow in that is supportive and gives them freedom to learn and explore
yeah,
in a safe way so that they gain that confidence and they can go out into the world and make a difference.
yeah. Absolutely. One thing I just thought about too is that homeschooling. I mean, stigma. I mean, when you go to a
Yeah.
school and you're in school,
Mhm.
there's probably not a neurodiverse child on the earth or adult that wasn't at some point bullied.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so, but that's not necessarily going to happen in homeschooling
No,
because,
it's not because their parents are always watching them. They're like, oh, I do not think so. You did not just treat them that way. Now you go apologize.
well, I mean, and because stigma
Yeah.
stays with you your whole
It
life.
does. It
Yeah.
does. And any kind of bullying and also when you're in a classroom setting full of other kids all your same age, there's this expectation that you're all supposed to do things at the same time. And when things are hard for you, kids, they have a smaller view of the world. And so they assume oftentimes that it means that they're just stupid and
Yeah.
it's something that's wrong with them. That's
Yeah.
always how they internalize it. When they
Yeah.
see differences, they always assume it's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
And to grow up with feeling that way can be
Yeah.
incredibly damaging as an adult. Those are things that stick with you for a lifetime. And so I think that homeschooling can be an even bigger advantage to neurodiverse kids because, like you said, a lot of times those are the kids that end up being picked on and bullied, and they're the ones that are in the classroom doing things in a different way, and they don't realize that that's normal for them.
Right.
They
Right.
assume there's something wrong with them.
Right. Well, I mean, that happened to me, and I can.
Oh, yeah.
There's a million stories
Oh,
of
yeah.
that. Yeah, a
Same.
million. On all sorts of different situations with the particularly neurodiverse
Mhm.
student that's not visible, and
Yeah.
the labels they put on them, and the kids can be very mean, and
Oh,
yeah,
they can be. And
yeah,
especially like I think that's natural in a school setting because we have so many kids and only so few adults that it kind of sometimes it can kind of become a bit of a mob mentality because you've got this group of kids and you want to fit in with the group. And if you don't fit in with the group, then there's consequences.
right. So I mean, none of that's going to happen when you homeschool.
No,
The teacher's going to respect you.
right.
Your parents around you, or family around you, and they
Mhm.
respect you. So you're not going to
Every
get.
once in a while, you have one family who, it's the family that makes the news, and it's the family that they aren't really homeschooling. They're just using it as a cover for some kind of abuse or something. But it's incredibly rare. Um, Homeschoolers, generally speaking, have much higher rates of positive mental health. They, generally speaking, have higher academic test scores. And I think a lot of that is because we're able to really support their growth and development and um, protect their time to play, which is how we learn. Mr. Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, my absolute favorite TV show in the world.
Yeah,
I mean, he's a great guy.
yeah,
Nobody doesn't love Mr. Rogers.
yeah,
Um, he always said that play was the child's work, and it truly is. That's how we learn and grow. And so protecting that time for kids, also protecting them from harm. It's not that they can't ever experience harm, but let's try to do that in a way that leads to growth and not harm.
Right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Now, I would assume that homeschooling is not for everybody. I mean, you must do some sort of assessment before you take on a child. Is that true?
Actually, anybody can homeschool. The only reason you wouldn't homeschool would be if a parent didn't want to. Because if a parent doesn't want to, you should definitely not homeschool. But if it's something you want to do, there are always things that we can do to help our children learn and grow. Just like there's always things you can do to provide your child with nourishing meals, no matter what unusual thing is happening physiologically. Maybe you need a specific food. Maybe you need to have a G or a J tube or something. But we figure out ways to feed our children, and it's the same way with education. The reason for doing assessments, though, is to figure out, okay, where are you and what are your specific needs? My goal when I have a family that I test, I do a very thorough assessment. I'm looking at the whole child. I'll ask nosy questions about their health, about academics, about just all different, their mental health, all different areas of a child's development. And then I'm looking for, okay, what is blocking us from learning? What's the next thing we need? Sometimes we have a physiological health problem that's not being addressed. And because we feel bad, we're not learning well. Sometimes it's that we have a mental health challenge that's not being taken care of and supported. And so then we feel bad and we're not growing and learning well. Sometimes it's a processing weakness. And if we can find that processing weakness and target it, we can improve dramatically. I've had kids improve 5 to 10 grade levels in a single year, year and a half in an area because we figured out what processing issue they had and we targeted it specifically. And at the same time, we very often didn't do much else that year because the brain gets overly tired if you try to do everything all at once. So if you find the one thing they need and you pick it just right and you target that, we'll see huge gains, which can oftentimes, if a child wants to go back to school, it can be what makes the difference in allowing them to go back to school and be successful because they had the time to focus on the processing issues and strengthen those.
Okay, that's a good point. But do you also do assessment of determine what is the disability?
Sometimes. Now, technically, to work worldwide, I had to give up my license. So used to be I diagnosed all the time. These days, what I do is I will do the full assessment. And then once I do the full assessment, I will write up a little letter with all the details and the parent can take it to their doctor. And if their doctor chooses to take that information and make it official, then they can. And very often they do. They usually like my letters.
Well, because it is it's an issue worldwide.
It
Assessment
is.
is an issue worldwide.
It is.
Some countries do a better job at it. Some
True.
countries do a very poor job at it. Some
Mhm.
countries don't even do it.
Right. And it can
And
be costly, and also there can be very long wait times too. And so this was a way I found to help families get the support they needed by skirting around some of the barriers that we have. So they can see me and I can say, okay, this is probably what we're dealing with. You should try this, this, and this. And if you want an official diagnosis, I can write you a letter and we can see if your doctor agrees. So.
because I know in some countries they do a very basic, and that's, I guess, basic as long as it's done correctly is better than nothing.
I think with assessment, it's very important. I like the phrase to mix it with brains. You can't just, like, especially with autism, we've come up with these autism tests. I absolutely hate them because it's based on a stereotype of autistic boy behavior. And so we miss a lot of girls and we miss a lot of boys that they're kind of like the girls. It's just a little bit different. Usually we label them as being hyperlexic. A lot of those boys, their behaviors are going to be very different from our stereotypical autistic boy. And so we miss a lot of kids that way. And I think the thing is that we like to have an assessment that makes it easy. You fill it out, you scored correctly, bingo, this is what you have. But what we really need to do is look at what's going on in there. Look at the big picture of the whole child. What's happening physiologically, what's happening cognitively, how are we processing information, and then take that whole picture and go, what is this telling us? Are we experiencing a difference in development that we can't account for any other way? Well, that's probably leading to communication challenges and social challenges. And that may lead us to think, okay, autism diagnosis. And I think that a lot of times people do not take the time to thoroughly look at a child as a whole person and to try to understand what's driving what we are seeing. And then what can we do, given that information, to provide the support that they need, just the right kind of support, because no two children are alike. So,
Absolutely.
mhm.
And let's take a little. I'm going to do a little advertisement here for the club
Okay.
and take a break, and then we'll come back for about 10 more minutes
Okay.
and cover a couple other things. So we're the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. We've been around for about 4 years at this point. We focus on the world, which is very cool. And we have members in over 30 countries at this point. We're closing in on about 80 members right now, and we're working on different things. We have 8 areas of focus, which basically anybody who is interested and has a passion for advocating for disabilities will cover one of them that you're probably interested in. So, if you're interested in getting involved in what we're doing, we certainly welcome you to do so. We have different levels of membership that we can bring you in on. I am going to bring up the email address, but it's got a typo in it, which I keep forgetting to fix. But and it's an obvious typo, so it's a RotaryWDA@gmail.com. So if that is something you want to be interested in, please, please, please write to us. We need you. The world needs you. People with disability need you. So please write to us and get a part of this cause. So now I forgot my question. There we go. So assessment. We could talk a whole subject on that.
Oh,
Go
yes,
on
it's its
forever.
whole thing.
Yeah. And being improperly assessed could really mess things up. Can really
Oh,
mess things up
yeah.
for a student.
I have heard some horror stories from parents of things they've been told.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
The
And
worst I hate is when someone gets IQ test scores and they say they're never going to be intelligent. IQ test scores are not predictive. They don't tell you how smart you are, and they don't tell you how smart you will be in the future.
so in
They
the
just
United
provide a
States,
snapshot.
IQ has to be done by a school system, right? Yeah, I mean, you don't
Well,
do it.
no, it could be done by a psychologist. It could be done by basically anyone who has the educational qualifications. I have them and I give them sometimes.
Oh, okay. Because
Mhm.
that's one of my things, and of course, once again, I was in school a long time ago, but I
Yeah.
think it's leaned against the student that has a
Mhm.
disability.
It
It leans against them.
It like autistic kids, their IQ scores are never valid because there's too broad of a range of their scores. But what it does is it gives us a snapshot of how our brain is thinking, like how our brain processes information. And so that can be very useful because if we're seeing a broad range of abilities within that test, that tells us development is definitely disrupted.
Yeah. Well, like once again, a long time ago when they do it, hopefully they do a better job at IQ testing than when I was in school. But I had no clue what I was taking. I was told I got to take this test. I have ADHD, so I can't focus on anything. So I sometimes I have to read the questions 3 or 4 times. Um,
Right.
and I don't think I probably took it too serious,
Hmm.
even though it was very serious. My guess is that probably my IQ score was very low because
Hmm.
of all that. And,
Yeah.
and obviously, to me, I feel that was not a proper assessment of my intelligence.
It's probably never a proper measure of your intelligence, and also the fact that we thought it was an intelligence test that measured intelligence, and then we found out years later that it doesn't actually measure intelligence because we can't even define intelligence. You
Yeah,
can't define it. You can't measure it.
I mean, you can name almost any university, neurodiversity,
Yes.
and you can say that it's that
Mhm.
student's going to struggle. Take somebody with
Right.
dyslexia.
Hmm.
They can't even read it, you know.
Right. And
And
that's
so,
why when you do testing, it's important to think about what that information tells you and not looking for a specific score. Because if I see a kid with a low test score, maybe it's in a specific area. Okay, do we have a processing weakness that is giving us challenges? And that's why. Is it that we have a short attention span and the tests that had required more attention are the ones that are weaker? And so that's why you really have to think about assessment when you're doing it. And a lot of people do not think over the possibilities clearly enough.
and I don't know what's that used for. I never knew what my score was. I probably don't want to know. Uh, and yeah, because my guess is fairly low. Because once again, it was that was nothing serious to me. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like a little game I was playing, tick on
Yeah.
this message, and I would lose interest. And anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that's a long story. And they told me I'd never go to college. And my guess is they were basing that on my IQ score.
They probably were. And I hate it when parents come to me and they have been told that about their child because IQ scores are not predictive. The only scores that are predictive is if you are perfectly average, you will probably stay perfectly average. That's the only thing it can predict. And so when we have atypical scores, the only thing it does is give us a snapshot of how that child's brain processes information in that one moment in time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm very anti IQ tests.
I
And
like them for what they can tell me because I can't just slice kids' heads open, dig my fingers around in their brain and see what's going on in there. Like, we can't do that. So, how else do you find, like, how a child processes different kinds of information and then giving them opportunities to try different things and see what they do? However, you don't want someone to get the impression that your IQ test is predictive or that it tells you how smart you are. Any child I get, even the kids who've come to me who are diagnosed with mental retardation or whatever, each state has its own terminology, intelligence, disabilities, whatever you want to call it. Um, each of those, I never tell them that they're not going to be able to go to college because I have seen kids make dramatic progress when we find what it is their bodies are asking us for and give them that. The
yeah,
key is figuring out what that is. And
yeah,
that's why I do all the assessments I do because I am looking for what is it your body's asking us for. And so I use all kinds of different ways of trying to figure out what that is. Because if we can figure that out and give it to a child and reduce their mental load while
yeah.
doing that, we can see huge changes. My own son, he improved 5 grade levels in listening comprehension in 1 year
Wow.
because we found the thing that his body was asking for and we
Yeah,
reduced the load of everything else while he worked on that. And
yeah.
it was a game changer. And there can be those kinds of game changers for other kids too. We just have to figure out what their bodies are asking us for.
And they and then they put the label on if you have a low than a 70 IQ test, you're
Yes,
considered to have retardation,
right.
which is a label to put on. But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean because maybe I'm not good at math, I'm not, but I maybe excel in science. So you know,
Exactly. And not to mention, I mean, sometimes kids test lower because they feel bad inside because they've got a physiological health problem that hasn't been addressed. Or maybe they score lower because turns out they had a hearing problem that no one knew about. There can be
right?
all kinds, or maybe they just are a late bloomer. And
Yeah,
sometimes it clicks later, or sometimes we find that processing weakness and we address it. It makes all the difference. And so just giving a test and looking at the results and putting a label on it that is not how we need to be doing assessment. We need to be looking at it more holistically. What's all this data? When we combine it all together, what kind of picture of this child does it give us? And what does that picture tell us about what that child needs? And what supports can we offer to that child to help them find more balance? Because kids are kind of like cars. If your tires are not well balanced, you don't drive as well and you don't get as good a gas mileage. And
Yeah.
kids are the same way. If our development and skills are out of balance, it makes it a lot harder. And so when I'm looking at assessment, I'm thinking, how can we help you find more balance in your development? Because if we can do that, you're going to learn very easily.
Right.
But if we can't find that balance, it's going to be more frustrating. And everybody can find more balance than they have right now if we can figure out where's that out of balance and how can we bring that back closer to imbalance.
So that's where homeschooling helps a lot, particularly for that individual
It does.
attention. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can choose to focus on one thing at a time if we need to.
I don't know what the ratio will accept the ratio of students to teachers at this point, but it must be what, 20 something to a student to a teacher? Or
it may be closer to 30 or more. I'm definitely seeing higher numbers now.
That individual attention you can give, and you're going to bring in all the factors, including IQ, but they can't get that in school. It's impossible.
Yeah, and I don't always give IQ. I always leave that up to the parents, but it is a way that we can find out more about how their brain is processing information. But we do not use that as a tool to label children because it's just a snapshot in time of what's happening in the moment.
Okay, very cool. Mm-hmm. So there may be some people that are watching or listening to this, and they're start thinking is maybe I should consider homeschooling. Obviously, as we talked about before, this is not a global thing. It's not available in every country. So you have to first of all check out and make sure it's legal in your country before you go to that direction. It doesn't hurt that you can't have a tutor.
No,
and supplementing the education that they're getting.
And there are plenty of parents who homeschool on the side after school hours. Yeah. You have to do that differently because you don't want to overload a child's brain.
So here's the question I'm getting to, or the point I'm trying to get to, is that what's your message to them? Somebody who's listening to you is now thinking about, well, maybe I should have thought about it. I didn't before. Yeah. What's your message to them?
I would definitely try to open your mind up to all of the different possibilities because each child is different and what they're going to need is also going to change over time, but it's also going to be different from child to child. And when we open our mind up to all the different possibilities that are available to us and any creative ideas that we can come up with that maybe aren't as obvious, those can only help us provide a better supportive environment for our children to help them grow and learn well. And, if you're in a country or a state where you are having trouble accessing assessment, you're not sure if you want to homeschool or not, but you're having trouble with accessing that assessment, you want to know, hey, I don't necessarily need a diagnosis, but I need a little bit of help figuring out what my child's body is saying that they need. I do work with families worldwide, and I work with families who homeschool, private school, and public school. I just get mostly homeschoolers because they tend to like to think outside the box a bit when it comes to education.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's always ways to get the supports, no matter where you are. There are ways that we can support our kids, even if there are no resources in your area. That is the beauty of homeschooling and what I do. It's looking at, all right, this is what we've got. This is what we've got to work with. What can we do with that to provide a child with an environment that's going to help them thrive?
Absolutely. So now, Amy, how are they going to get in touch with you?
If you want to get in touch with me, you can go to my website. It's amybodkin.com. Super easy. You can also find me on social media at amybodkineds.
Okay, now you got to do it slower and again. So,
Okay, Amy Bodkin. I'm going to spell it out.
okay.
AMYBODKIN.com. And then you can find me at Amy Bodkin EDS on social media.
Okay, very cool.
So
So I
super
imagine
easy.
you'll take any questions. You'll certainly
Oh
help
yeah.
guide some people through this whole
Oh yeah. I
thing.
get all kinds of questions. We've talked toilet training, we've talked academics, we've talked behavioral challenges, trauma. Um, yeah, pretty much anything that affects children, I get. So
Okay, so very cool. All right.
yeah,
Well, thank you for the work you're doing. Much
thank you.
appreciated. It's a pleasure to have you on here and get this message out to the world. We could go on for many more hours about this, and maybe we should do something separate on the side. But we'll see. We'll talk
Absolutely.
about that. So
Yeah.
much appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. And we will be also saving this recording and putting it on YouTube. Once again, we are the Rotary Club World Disability Advocacy, RotaryWDA@gmail.com. If you have any questions, and if you want to direct the question to Amy too, then you can't reach her somehow, just write to us and we'll make sure she gets that question.
Awesome.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. All right, take care.
Thanks.